I have PK here with me, and PK Gupta is, gosh, PK, I did a little research on you. I looked you up on LinkedIn as well. We've had lots of conversations previously, and you know, the thing that I really appreciate about PK is his straight to the point commentary about what's happening in the market, the way that he looks after community with care and consideration. So PK, over to you. You've built this incredible community. You've got a specific type of investing strategy. Can you just take me back so everyone can get a little bit of a origin story for you? You were an investor. Do you want to take me through your kind of investment journey and how you've got to this point, and then we're going to get into the market.
Okay, sure, no problem. First of all, I have to say thank you very much, Jane, for having me on. And I think we did an interview or a video maybe a couple of years ago, and it's always very nice for me because I remember back in 2014 or 15, I used to listen to a few different podcasts, and you would always be on those podcasts, and I wasn't like a professional quote unquote back then. So it's like, oh, now I'm sort of talking with someone who I used to look up to. So that's pretty cool for me. So thank you so much for your kind words. In terms of my investing background, I can't say there's any rags to riches story or any fancy things like that.
No trauma
It's
you can share with us.
just a lot of hard work and sacrifice. Started 2011, and I was an investment banker at the time in Sydney, not having an amount of savings that I could really get into the Sydney market, even though I kind of wanted to be honest with you, and probably deploy the Trident strategy or whatever. And I invested in East Gosford back then because it was in my range, 300K with rent being around that 300K, 300 a week mark as well. And that's kind of how I've built my portfolio to 12 properties now. It's really been trying to take away the opinions of people, including my own opinions, the opinions of my mind, and really anchor my thoughts and decisions on data. And I didn't see a huge need to trade off capital growth for cash flow. And so maybe I've just super lucked out. And if that's the case, I'll take it. But I really found that this age-old premise that some people say, not everyone, that you have to buy in blue chip Sydney, Melbourne, maybe Brisbane to get the best capital growth, and you need to buy negatively geared properties. I really didn't see that to be true in my own experience. And then when I did various data analysis over 30, 40 years of history, I didn't find it to be true. So, I mean, now I think people understand that concept a little bit more, but at least when I was starting off or in the earlier part of last decade, it was something quite maverick. And I think I required a lot of, how do you say, like maybe just foolishness to ignore what everyone was saying, or you could
I
say a
think
little bit of
I
like
think
maverickness.
I heard someone call it like innocence. It's like in no sense. It's like everyone is saying this is the way to do things, and you're like, well, really, is that really the way to do it? And that's what's really I find remarkable when I listen to your podcast and your streams and your incredible content on YouTube, which we'll put some a little bit later, is that every single time you turn up with some data-backed information, and like I did, went back through the 16,656 suburbs over 20 years and went, gee, which suburbs outperform the others, and it applied a methodology. But this different methodology has got you to, you've got a six-figure cash flow positive income, which allows you to do other things. And, it's one thing to go, I just want a capital growth portfolio, right? Which is, I'm going to have to make some sacrifices and fund that to the end. There's another one that says, I really want the cash flow. So I'm making, $100 a week on 10 properties or whatever it is to get to what you want. But at the end, they may not have gone up. And then, where I was like, I was using renovation to go, well, why can't I have both? Why can't I have some better cash flow and
Mhm.
uplift it? And you have that, there are areas where I can actually have positive cash flow properties, and I don't necessarily have to have a trade-off with growth. And you've done that in, I guess, when I look at your community, a lot of people are buying in that lower, well, what would you say, $500,000 and below area?
Very much, yeah, under four. I mean, it used to be under 350, but those days are basically gone now. Under 400, under 500, under 600.
So you're telling me there's cash flow with growth, properties around Australia under $500,000.
Yes.
You heard it here first. So are we talking like we're heading out to Broken Hill? What are we looking at in those kind of areas?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any secret. And I think one thing is that, I mean, you're more experienced than I am, Jane, but I found that especially in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, people have just become so much more knowledgeable on property investing, probably because of content that folks like you are putting out, myself. There's so much content out there, good and bad, but there's a lot.
Mm.
And so don't think it requires a course or a buyer's agent or any kind of expensive thing to be able to say, oh, look, you can go to Perth, like let's say in the Bunbury region, you can
Mm.
still buy properties under 450K. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you should just go off and buy anything. And just because I said it here, you go off and buy it. But they're there, even in places like Townsville, Toowoomba, a little bit more hard to come
The
by now.
larger, like we're talking about the cities that are on the top five, top 50 population list. We're not
Not
talking
just
about
not just
we're
top
going
50,
into
like top 20. Yeah, like
yeah,
maybe I mean I'm from Queensland. Maybe if you're in Melbourne, you don't really understand, or Sydney or somewhere else, you don't really understand like Townsville. But this is not a small place, you know. Nor is Toowoomba. I mean, Toowoomba is just as diversified as Newcastle or Geelong or Wollongong or these places where maybe more people know about. And you can still buy under 450, 500, even in Mackay. And I think the one thing to note as well, Jane, I think this is an important point. When I say some of these things, instantly, those who are more experienced than me, perhaps like you or other people that are in your community or elsewhere, because they've lived through the Australian housing cycle more often than I have, there's kind of like stigmas attached to various locations. It's like, oh my God, why would you buy in Townsville? Like the crime there is through the roof. It had an unemployment rate of like 10%
it's an
just
army
5 years
town.
ago. Yeah. And there's a million examples of, like Bunbury. It was the worst performing location, even in WA, for the last decade. It's like this guy, why is he talking? But if you take a moment in time, look at it today and compare the diversity of employment, of our output and the economy, you see that some of these places are chalk and cheese, and
Yeah.
you can't discount them just because of how they were before, and they present great opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I moved to Melbourne from Sydney for work in 1997. We're going, you keep referring to me as, experience. I'm going old, but
No,
in
seriously.
1997. And I pinpointed, and I wasn't really into property, but I thought, if I rent for a while, I might buy a property. That's what people kind of do. There's the conformity of buying a home. And I went to an area that's on the bay called Williamstown. And I went to 3 real estate agents there and said, look, I thought I'd rent here and then buy. And they're like, there's no way we're renting to a single female in this town. And I was like, oh my God, like, really? This is, and I was like, no, I've done this kind of analysis, like it's commutable and it's like got the view and it's great. And they're like, no way, this is like, you do not want to live here. And then, fast forward a little bit, 2001, moved back to Sydney with my, now husband, my partner then. And I was like, Newtown looks really good. And everyone's like, it's grungy. Who would want to be in Newtown? It's dirty, and I was looking at Redfern. They're like, no, there's all these issues with crime. And someone said to me, look at Paddington 20 years ago. And everyone said that's workers' cottages, don't buy in Paddington. Like there's these things. And to your point, we have this parochial kind of mindset that says, well, this is the way that I think it is. And one of my biggest bugbears was talking to people about their investing journey. And they would say things like, I buy where I live because I know it. and you'd say, oh, so tell me what's the percentage of renters? What's the all the demographic information? What's the average house price? What's the average house size? All of these things. They go, well, I don't know that. I'm like, so what do you know about your area? And I think it's one of those things where, you have to throw things up. And, as much as I teach it's been nice to have blue chip. And if you can't do blue chip, let's look at satellite cities or look at those cities with population. You kind of go to those cities with population, and I imagine some diversity with economy as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's a great point you raise around people who buy in their backyard. And no offense to anyone, I actually find that sometimes because they know like the comparables really well in their backyard, sometimes they pick up fantastic deals in terms of they know because they've lived on this block or this street for years. They know that that should have gone for 800, but they bought it for 750. But that doesn't take away from the point that you're making. It's like, great, you've made maybe some money on the way in. But if that thing doesn't grow over the next 2, 5, 10 years, or if it underperforms in its growth, like, what's the point of making money on the way in? I mean, the real engine behind property investing is always growth. No amount of cash flow or under market value or even I want to say renovation can really compensate for like the engine, which is growth over the long term.
We've got a comment here from Jen who says, you guys are the two voices in property I've learnt the most from over the years. What a treat to listen to you having a chat. It really doesn't get much better than this. I'm a current PK student as well as a long-term listener and follower of Jane. So there you go. We have some crossover, which is good. One of the things I want to pull out before we have a look at the market and answer any questions people have is you're known for being a little bit, I'm going to say, ooh, taken on the big boys of buyers agents and calling them out. For those who don't know, your thoughts on that, can you share those with us, please?
This is something I really appreciate about yourself, Jane, because even though you're also in the category of like, the all-star team of property investors in Australia, you have a sense of humility and constant learning mindset. There's, I often say this, and I don't want to come across as cliche, but there's really two ways that newbie or somewhat experienced property investors can be blinded. There's two ways to be blinded. One is where there's no light at all. You have no information. And the second way is where you've got too much information. It's like looking up at the sun. Like no one can really do that, right? Everything ends up blurry. So what I find is that someone with no information, they go to naturally the quote unquote experts in Australia. And these quote unquote experts are oftentimes big box buyers agents. There's a aphorism or proverb that, whoever rules the airwaves, wins the war. It's like that's why a lot of people don't like some countries and like others depending on where they live, etc. Because the media, the content they consume. And the reality is that if you have no information and you type in Google or YouTube or wherever, you're going to find buyers agents, right? Or if you have too much information, then you're going to be like, oh, I can't digest this. I'm not an expert. Let me once again outsource to buyer's agents. So this perennial problem of ignorance, which comes from too much information or not enough information, everyone always resorts or the recourse is always buyer's agents. And I have nothing against buyer's agents in of themselves,
Although
but
they
where
think that you do. Every now and then I see them attacking you. I'm like, wow, he's never actually said anything anti-buyers agents. There's an alternative way.
exactly. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like, okay, too much information, looking at the sun blinds you. No information is you're blind. What about a middle ground? What about actually educating yourself from someone who's not trying to then get you as a buyer's agent client? And so if you learn, and you do this, Jane, if you learn in a systematic, structured way, and of course you'll lack confidence because you've not done it before, but if you have a mentor like Jane or someone else that can then say, all right, I don't know about that property, or yeah, go for this one, or you haven't considered this valuation or the street in the suburb, then you can couple decades of experience with data or with real systematic education and do it yourself. And there's a quote, I don't know who says it, but strength doesn't come from what you can do, it comes from overcoming the things that you thought you couldn't. And I often find that when I started, I thought, I mean, in a sense, when you you mentioned it at the start of the episode, I thought hopefully my clients can get results as good as buyer's agents. That was my experience, and I was hoping my clients could do the same. But I found, and this isn't like a sales thing or anything, but I found that they've been able to get incredible results just because no one cares about your money as much as you do, and they really dig in their heels and just give it their all. And that's kind of where my conviction comes from. I don't want to talk negatively about buyer's agents, but it's a positive alternative.
So do you want to take us down the secret sauce of the positive alternative, how people can remotely possibly buy without using a buyer's agent? Because I think that's one of the most compelling um, sales and marketing opportunities for buyer's agents, saying, look, you don't want to buy in your own backyard.
Mhm.
You want to diversify your portfolio across states and economies, etc. And let's face it, landlord rulings and all these things that go, that change, so how are you going to buy in a different state? And it's like, well, how about I get the local who knows what's happening? But the local who knows what's happening is not always a buyer's agent. There's alternatives, right?
Right, right. And this was a shock to me. I mean, and it is definitely no secret source. Like you don't have to do my course to be able to do this yourself. It was just commonsensical. Like when I bought my first property, like I was saying, I was in Sydney and I was an investment banker. I was working like 90 hours a week. I didn't have time to go up to East Gosford on the weekends and inspect properties and that was not something I wanted to do after not getting any sleep for like the whole week. So I think one day I just picked up the phone and called a couple of property managers in the area just to see if, they could just do that inspection for me, or at least just give me some intel just off desktop about whether that property that I was interested in was, had tenant appeal, whether it was like in a dodgy part of the suburb or not, housing commission, etc. And the lady, I forget what her name is, but the lady was so nice. She was like, yeah, no problem. I mean, I just live around the corner. Our office is just around the corner. We can just go and inspect it for you, and we'll let you know how it is. And I was like, oh, like what do I pay you? Like $50, $100? Like what do I pay you? She was like, no, I mean, if you like it and you end up buying it, then hopefully you give us the management, and that's a 10, 20, 30-year deal for them.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, this is good. I don't know if I will give them the management, but I mean, let me at least try this out. I didn't get that property, but I got another one, and I ended up giving that agency the management. And it was like, okay, that was a little bit too easy, like it was too good to be true, kind of thing. I mean, that property
That
ended
was
up
one
doing.
nice person in the entire, property management team, but
Yeah, it wasn't even the business development person. It was just like the act. It was a
yeah,
small agency.
yeah.
And so then my next property, I mean, I just did this again and again, and I was like, hang on a second, no one knows property managers. I mean, you and I know them, but I don't think the average person understands that property managers don't just manage your property, but rather they can help with the buying process as well. And then when I built my portfolio and I was like, okay, I'm going to start helping others, it was just for free, basically, friends and family. I started ringing a whole host of property managers across states and territories, different cities, to see if mine was just an exception or whether I just got lucky. And it turns out like 80, 90% of property managers do this. I was like, why do we have buyer's agents? Like these ladies or gentlemen, managers, they live in the area, right? Even if it's a big city like Brisbane, they only manage like a few suburbs. They know those suburbs really well. They have hundreds of properties in those suburbs under rent roll, and they have no incentive to lie to you because if there's some sort of huge issue with the property or it's hard to be tenanted, well, they're the ones who are going to suffer as well because they're going to increase their workload in the management of it, or if it can't be rented, then they're just missing out on management fees. So I was like, the only professional that has the longest relationship with your property is the property manager. And so therefore, there's a sense of trust. There's a sense of like, okay, it's not a transaction for them, it's a long-term relationship. And so therefore, I had so much more conviction in what I was teaching, to just family and friends that, yeah, you don't need a buyer's agent. These guys can do it if not the same, but actually better.
It's interesting you say that because it makes me think too, I had a number of courses, Oldman Guide to Renovation, Location Masterclass, etc. There was lots of webinars and information and, you know, 10 years worth of content. And it's those little things that you forget. And you've just reminded me of one of the like little secrets that I had around renovation. And that was I had managed a remote renovation whilst living here in Melbourne, in Sydney, in the property I had bought in Newtown, Darlington, with the property manager. And I had said to them that, I want to do this renovation. They're like, well, we can handle that for you. And it was free. And I was like, what? She said, yeah, I'll get 3 carpet guys and 3 paint quotes, and I'll get the 3 roofing quotes, and I'll get the kitchen quotes. And I was like, for free? She said, yeah, I'll just put a lockbox out the front and, make sure that the quotes come in okay. And then you approve them. And I was like, this is really good. And then I had a builder. And so I reached out to him to do my uh, kitchen, and I went down here to Bunnings in Melbourne and went to National Tiles, etc., and I chose different finishes and just had them delivered to Newtown, and there was a lockbox. Everyone kind of like got in, got out, and it was very easy. So I only I would get daily kind of updates from the guys on the roof with, it's raining men in the background singing, showing me what the roof was up to. But I didn't have to turn up. And the property manager actually did all the quoting for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I found also when I was looking at buying properties, for every 10 properties I would inspect to buy, I'd look at one rental on the market that was comparable and just check out, was there, rental agent sitting there on a social media, or is he, not really interested? Were these people I wanted to manage my property, but also, some intel or listening what the tenants wanted. And I think I used to call it the Pig Panther method. And what struck me was if you had a really good property manager, you could say to them, look, could you convert that extra lounge room into a 3rd bedroom? What would be the extra rent? And they know that area. And so the upshot of the renovation, you could run past them as well. Or they'd say, look, no one wants a 5-bedroom around here. I've never had anyone ask for it. And you're like, okay, that's one less thing I have to worry about. So that property manager, I think that, when I talk about the board of directors that you have to help you, that's a key operational and also, potential for what you're saying, helping you buy. And I'm saying helping you also understand the renovation uplift that people forget. So, that's incredible. And so some of you've got lots of students who are going through your course regularly. Are you seeing some absolute incredible deals that they're picking up through these agents?
I actually find that well, I think the first thing I just want to say is a massive shout out to all property managers and all mortgage brokers. I mean, maybe this is just my opinion, but these 2 professions are the hardest working in the property industry. And so, if you're a property manager or broker, you know what I'm talking about, right? So it's a massive kudos. I think property managers, especially, are the most important part of your team. That's just my
I'd say
personal
one
experience.
thing about that, just before you do. I think I have my hat here. I have my mortgage broking hat. I'm just going to put it on.
There you go.
But they've just announced that mortgage brokers are writing 70% of the loans in Australia. So kudos. When I started, I think we were down to like 30%. But mortgage brokers are feeling everyone's pain of going from 3% interest rates up to 6, 7, 8, 9% interest rates for some people. And, these interest rate rises and having to deliver the messages that they can't help you is bearing so greatly. There's a huge suicide rate increase in the mortgage broking industry at the moment. So just a heads up, be kind to your broker, because they're really out there to help you. And there's a significant mental health challenge that they're going through at the moment.
That's a really good shout out. I mean, I know the brokers that I know, they always get phone calls on like a Saturday or Sunday and this and that. So, I mean, we all expect so much of our professionals, but I think they're also human, right? So this is a really good shout out. Thanks. Thanks for doing that, Jane. And
Back to you.
no, in terms of answering your question, people always think that off-market deals are best achieved through buyer's agents because, hey, there's a buyer's agent. They know this agent for like 3, 5 years. They're like best buddies. How on earth could you possibly get a better off-market deal than through that relationship? And of course, most off-market deals are actually off-market for a reason and they're not that crash hot in the first place. But that not withstanding, I found that property managers a relationship with them often yields the same number, or if not even a greater number and greater quality of off-market deals for an investor. And a really good example is I interviewed a lady from Toowoomba recently, and she was saying, look, PK, your clients in Toowoomba are getting more off-market deals than all of the buyers agents that I'm managing their properties, their clients' properties for them. And I said, what's the reason for that? And she said, because they're asking me for the off-market deals and they're building a relationship with me. And she has a rent roll, her agency has a rent roll of like, 600, 700 properties. And they're always having investors sell those properties. And so if you're a nice, kind, polite, amicable, efficient investor who's like, hey, Jane, you're a property manager. I'm looking for these types of properties. Would you be able to do some inspections for me, manage my properties for me? And by the way, if you find any off-market deals, please send me my way, send them my way because I have my pre-approval ready. I'm ready to go. And of course, if you've got 700 properties on your rent roll, there's always going to be investors that are looking to sell, and those investors oftentimes want to deal in an efficient way with other investors. And I really found, I mean, I never created my course to get this result through property manager off-market deals originally, but I found that so many are coming through that. And it's phenomenal because the property manager already knows the quality of that property, already knows the tenancy history, already kind of knows more than what you'd know on the free market. And there's just some amazing deals, like one in Withers, which is in WA. I think the purchase price was like 400 or something. The existing rent was 350, but everyone knew it was under rented. And we increased the rent 4 months after settlement and it rented it up to 700, or I think it was 6 or 700, end up being basically a positive cash flow property. And, still the affordability of the tenant who selected that property is less than 30% of their income. So it's still affordable for them, a win-win for everyone. So yeah, property managers, once again, hats off to them.
So here's something interesting, a couple little nuggets I'm taking from that. Property managers are actually sitting in the same office as the property salespeople often as well. So I know when I speak to buyers agents, they're saying, look, I know they're putting all the property sales guys on a bus and they're driving around Melbourne going, these are the ones that we've got coming up next week. Here's the ones our competition have got coming up, know the market. I guess they're going back to the office and chatting to the property managers. So the property managers probably have a little insight what's happening. And I just know personally, my property manager told me about a month ago to put my rent up $200 a week. And I was just like, that is just too much. And I don't want my tenants to put an extra person in the property. I don't want it to be difficult for them. And they've said, well, if you don't put it up, it's just going to keep going. It's going to be very hard. And I said, well, let's put it up half. And so I went back with half. But of course, one person moved out and now they want two people to move in. And I was like, oh, no, this is difficult. Maybe I should consider selling. This is just, I know the wear and tear on the property. And so we had a conversation about what would I have to do to bring it up to sell. And I was like, well, how about we just go through and do an inspection and have a look, if we do enter the tenancy at a particular time in the future, tell me what work I need to do to re-let this, because in actual fact, the market is $300 more than what they're paying. And that kind of intel, like if I was going to sell, she's the first person I was talking to who had any insight that that was going to happen. And if she'd
Yeah.
bought a deal to me, then, it could have just solved all my problems. So yeah, just a few little nuggets there around how valuable your property manager might just be to you.
And people don't know still what property managers do. Most people just think, oh, they're another real estate, but they have a license, but they're not real estate agents.
Mm.
I don't want to say they're more ethical because there's plenty of ethical and really good real estate agents as well, but they just have a different vibe about them. In my experience, they're just a bit more helpful.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing your goodness. Now let's get to the market. Now, I've seen a number of videos that you put out around immigration, around unemployment. Let's tackle interest rates, all of those things. Which one would you like to tackle first?
Should we do immigration?
Let's
It
do
seems to be the
immigration.
topic of the day.
Yeah, exactly. So, we had what, 550,000 people come in 12 months up to September last year. The numbers that came out this week were in February, 110,000 long-term overseas visitors in 1 month. We've got a rental crisis. We've got all the pressure on us. What's this mean for the property market?
Look, I think on the face of it, what it means is quite obvious, right? I mean, it's just a demand supply type of equation. The more people that you come in that come into Australia increases demand. Of course, it's more nuanced than that. A lot, if not the majority of that 500,000 are on student visas. So, they're not the type that generally are buying properties. They're more renting properties, especially kind of inner city or Melbourne or around university campuses across the nation. My hypothesis is that it's not really those folks that are really causing house prices to lift up because they're not buying in, Geelong necessarily. They're not buying in the Sydney context. They're not buying in Baulkham Hills. In the Brisbane context, they're not buying in Banyo and et cetera, et cetera. So there's more to it than just those student visas. It's like you referred to the people on the path or already who have permanent residency. And the numbers of them haven't really dwindled. The government had made some truncation of visa policies, but they didn't really target these people on permanent residency visas. So I think the immigration problem is in terms of how it relates to housing shortage, as severe and acute as ever. Most of these people, as you know, Jane, they stay in Australia for maybe 1 to 3 to 4 years on renting, and
Mm.
then they buy their house. They kind of find their feet,
Which
they
is the
settle
same for
down.
students too, right? Usually.
Yeah, students as well. But what I'm finding at least is that because they can't find anywhere to rent. There's a huge rental shortage. They're they're getting in line to buy a house quicker than they otherwise statistically would have, in years gone back. And I kind of feel sorry for them in a way because, they're promised to come over to Australia with a job or a promise of a job, and it's the land of milk and honey, etc. But then they come here and it's like they can't afford rent or there's just nothing available. It's
Mm.
very hard to afford a house or there's nothing available. And of course, they're needing to work very hard, etc. And now with the labor market just showing a little bit of signs of becoming a bit more weak, a lot of companies laying off. These immigrants are, I think it's easy for us to say, oh, they're the problem, but they're facing problems as well. So it's like a bit of empathy is required. They're experiencing as much of an issue as local people.
Yeah.
But notwithstanding that, they're still coming in, and the government isn't really changing much to that effect. So I don't see the housing market really slowing down in its acceleration as long as this immigration story unfolds. And it's not always the case that population rises cause house prices rises. I mean, it's an easy equation to draw a line, but if you look at Brisbane between 2000 and I think 10 to about 10 years, the house prices went up about 18%, but it had the second highest, population increase out of anywhere in Australia. So what that tells you is that population can increase and house prices can be pretty flat. Like, so it's not population by of itself that's the problem, it's its relationship with supply. And Brisbane had oodles of supply in the last decade. Now it doesn't, and basically nowhere across Australia does have enough supply. So it's like a perfect storm. And I'm in the property industry, you're in the property industry. We all want a healthy property market. And I've been saying this for a while. Constant double-digit increases in house price growth, or even beyond 7 or 8% year after year after year after year. This is not healthy and it's not good for the long term or even medium term economic health of this country either.
Mm. So how do you stop that? Do you turn off immigration? Do you just build more houses? I mean, the government's said that they're going to build more properties, but they're kind of not even on target yet. Like, how do you, stop that growth?
So it's a hard thing because, the argument is, right, well, let's just turn the tap off and let's just get less immigrants through and that solves the problem. Well, that could be a bandage to the existing sort of acute issue. But
Mm.
what we have in Australia is the lowest productivity out of basically any OECD nation. And what that means is that the output in the economy per capita or per person, the rate of growth in that has been dwindling, and we're so far behind the US, we're so far behind Canada, we're so far behind the UK. It's like not even funny. We're just so lucky, the land of rich and rare. We're so
And the
lucky we have
resources.
these things underneath the soil, and that's really what's keeping us afloat at the moment. And so if you turn off this immigration story, what you have is a stagnating economy with a skills shortage. And unless all of a sudden reap the benefit of innovation and technological advancement, transferring a sort of, labor-heavy output to a capital or tech-heavy output, then you just can't stop immigration because the economy comes to a halt. And, innovation takes a considerable investment over decades to bear fruit. And it doesn't happen overnight. And my humble opinion is that in Australia, from a government, whether it's federal or state, we haven't really had an innovation agenda ever, really. So,
Maybe
it,
South Australia is the only one that I can see is actually taking the lead on that, but there's nothing else.
yeah. So, I listened to a demographer recently, and he said that in Australia, we have four major industries. We have mining, we have education, which we export, we have agriculture, and we have tourism. And so I'm thinking, all right, mining, and you used to be in the mines, right? So you know about this. Mining is already, to a large extent, morphed into being largely capital heavy. You don't need so many miners these days. You don't need so many boots on the ground. So that has occurred. But how do you make agriculture, export and harvesting and the whole thing more efficient? How do you make tourism more efficient in terms of the output? And how do you make education, output more efficient in terms of needing less people? And I mean, I'm not an expert in either of those three, but I struggle to see how that will happen in the short term. So in lieu of that happening,
Mm.
we're really relying on these people to come in and somewhat, I don't know if this is a fair statement, but somewhat artificially keeping our GDP vibrant or buoyant. I think there was just a statistic, Jane, from NAB that I think it was like half of the GDP that growth that we'd experienced in the last, was it 6 months or a year or something like that, was from students, like the multiplier effect of the
Yep.
student economy. And so if we didn't have that, we'd be in a recession right now.
Mm.
So I don't think you can turn that off. And to your point, I won't labor the subject, but how do we increase supply? Well, with the still construction prices fairly high, they're kind of coming down a bit now, but they're
Still
still
25% higher than pre-COVID, right? So,
exactly. They're still up there. We still have a labor shortage. We still have high interest rates, which are really hurting builders, and they're going down, in the dozens with local planning policies and local government areas and councils. I mean, I'm used to be a developer, not so much anymore, but I know how hard it is to get a planning permit, especially in Brisbane City Council. Shout out for how bad they are. It's just impossible to get that stuff out of the ground, even if it's approved. We still have lots of backlog of building approvals, but they're just not getting out of the ground. So it's like I said before, and maybe sounding a little bit pessimistic here, but maybe it's realistic. We have a supply issue. We're definitely not meeting the 1.2 million target that government has of new houses by the end of 2029. I think there was a Master Builders Association that said that in the next 3 months, I'm going to get the statistic wrong, I can't remember it. We need another 60,000 like plumbers, carpenters, electricians, like 60,000 in the next 3 months. Like it's not happening. So I mean, you tell me what's the solution. I don't know.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, as an investor, it hurt my heart to say, how do we bring the capital growth down from 7%, right? But I was respond.
By the way, I don't, sorry to interrupt. I genuinely think we need it. I genuinely think we need a couple of years of like no growth to consolidate.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I was speaking, oh gosh, on stage 2007, 2008, 2009, and I'd say things like the long-term 20-year growth is, 7%, and people go, no, BS, BS. I'm like, it is actually. And, now we just take it for granted. And I was looking at 10-year growth for, major regionals, etc., for a property portfolio calculator to compare people's portfolios just the other day, and it was like 6.5, 7, 8, the numbers are there. It's interesting. My sister is actually a thought leader in the future of agriculture space, and the AI and the things that they're doing. She's just been over to Canada with the Commonwealth thought leaders on agriculture. And, that productivity and what they're doing there is just extraordinary. So I know there's like these tech plays that are going on to help with productivity. But then on the other side, I've got aging parents, and I'm looking at the needs that they have. And when I reviewed as you said, the visa changes, March 23rd, visa changes, and there's some inclusions there around core professions now. Not too sure why a poultry farmer CEO is a core profession that we're looking for to bring to Australia, but it's one of them. But that kind of help and services to our our aging population is needed. And a lot of people don't want to do that. And even just chatting on Sunday to the local, checkout chick at Woolies, and I was saying to him, hey, what are you studying? And he said, I live at the Housing Commission area around the corner, and I'm studying cybersecurity. And I said, oh, tell me, do you have a passion in IT? Is it trying to get back at the baddies? Why are you doing it? He said, the course is free. So to answer your question, I think there's some interesting things there that, we could 60,000, tradies. We could obviously make some courses more, and they're trying that in the trade schools, trying to encourage people to see that as a career. I think even some interesting information where you look at those people who go to university with the hope that they come out with a $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 bill for their education and are always playing catch up. They're actually seeing their friends who are doing the trades or doing something or starting a business who actually end up making more money. So the long-term, conservative view of get a good mark, go to university, get a good degree, pay off the degree for a long period of time, and then I'll be rewarded financially. If we could start teaching at a younger age, the fact that maybe hands-on tools and multiple industry or jobs and not having to be set in motion and thinking a little entrepreneurial about your career or starting a business and then investing and, putting that out there would be great. So I think there's those things. I don't think the government's going to build all these properties, and I don't think that we're going to turn off immigration. As I said in 2020, watch this space. We are in the biggest lockdown in the world, but we're an island, and people are going to want to come to us because we've managed that death rate really well, and we have properties and accommodation, and we got a lot of land. We don't want to live in the desert, but we've got a lot of land. So I think there is I don't think there is an answer, and I think we will. Interest rates are trying to stop us to some degree, but I've been looking at the mortgage rates in the last 3 months, and the investors are taken off. So, we kind of got this is the people in the know are kind of already moving, and that's just going to put and I think it's because, as you said, the students and the people who are coming, they need to live somewhere. So we have to provide some accommodation for them. So I think there is some innovation there as well, which leads me to unemployment. And I know you've recently had some thoughts on this. We've got some numbers out to say unemployment's going up. Like, how does that work if we're bringing people in who are taking jobs? Like, who's sacking people here? What's happening?
Yeah, it's I think it's interesting. The unemployment rate kind of edged up. I think it was in December or January, I'm gonna get the months wrong. But then in February it started sort of just edges down a little bit again, and that sort of spooked the market to say, oh look, interest rates aren't coming down. anytime soon. In reality, if you look at the absolute number of employed persons in Australia, that's been trending up. Unemployment rate is obviously there's a numerator and a denominator, and it depends on the participation rate and the labor force rate, et cetera, et cetera. But look, I think people are coming into Australia in the jobs that are necessary because those, I mean, maybe save and accept the poultry, what was it? The poultry farm
Poultry farm
CEO.
CEO.
Maybe accept that person. These
Yoga
jobs are required.
instructors are no longer on the list though, so not a core industry.
Right. I remember like in 2022 or 2021, even like life coaches were a shortage and they were like bringing life coach. I thought that was interesting. Anyways, the people coming in, they are coming in for a specific purpose, and that's to do a job, to do a job that there's not enough local people to do. This is generalization. But
Yeah.
there's other parts of the labor force or the labor market that are a bit softer, like, for example, the big four accounting firms, consultancy firms, a lot of professional services, even to some extent, some parts of the IT sector, they're letting go of a number of people, not taking on new graduates, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's nuanced, but there's definitely something to be said of a weakening look ahead for the labor market in Australia compared to our peers, if you can call them peers, but like the US, Canada, especially the US. I think everyone thinks that the US is going to dictate our interest rates, and I think to a large extent that's always been the case. But if you look right now, and if you look beyond the sort of just mainstream commentary, the US economy is actually remarkably strong. Their CPI, I mean their labor wages, the wage growth is trending higher than CPI. Their unemployment rate is much low. That's still trending down. Their everything is really strong. Their GDP growth is like double what we have right now. So I don't think we can couple or tie or link our fortunes on what the US is doing because our labor force or our labor market is actually quite weak. Our wage growth is coming downwards, whereas in the US it's the opposite. And I put that down almost squarely due to tech and innovation, which obviously the US is a market leader on for many, many years. And once again, I don't want to, sort of really go into the subject unnecessarily, but if you look at Japan, which didn't have, didn't really have that immigration story. Japan's never really loved a whole lot of immigration for like 300 years, but their economy, although not the super buoyant type or variety that sort of Western democracies like, the economy's been pretty sort of stable and solid. And one reason for that is because a lot of what they generate is based on tech and innovation or light engineering. And a lot of what they do, their output is actually done by overseas workers that they don't actually get to come into Japan. Places like Indonesia, they do a lot of work for automobile manufacturing, and then ultimately it goes back to Japanese GDP, etc. So we don't have the luxury of that in Australia with, mining. You can't export that. Education, I mean, it's always going to be basically onshore agriculture, etc. So I think it's we're a unique country and we need to find solutions for our unique situation and set of parameters. The labor market is definitely getting a little bit weak, but I think I did a video, Jane, that you may have watched. The
Yeah.
long-term average for unemployment rate is like 6.5% in Australia. We're still just teetering around 4%. Even if it goes up 50%, it's like, great, we're long-term averages. By the way, in the Sydney boom that everyone knows of, 2014 to 17 or 16, house prices went ballistic. Unemployment was beyond 6%. So
Yeah.
just because unemployment goes up doesn't mean that the economy is all of a sudden super weak. The housing market will fall. None of that will happen, in my estimation. For housing market to really for prices to really shallow out, we need to change the supply story, especially in places like Perth. Demand is good and solid and buoyant and healthy, but if it's, if supply was higher, then that would be an equilibrium situation. It's
Yeah.
not like Perth demand is what it was like in Sydney in the middle of the last decade. I don't know if you agree with those thoughts. What do you think?
It's I just find it very hard sometimes to separate, and you said it right at the top, there's a narrative in the media, and they're going to give you a glimpse of information. Just like I said, unemployment's going up. Well, the number of people employed is not really, that we're okay. And it's how you navigate the information. So the correlation of things, the Perth market, Western Australian market, I've never tried to anticipate a growth opportunity there, because it's linked so much to the commodity market. And I was like, I can't work that out. So I don't know what's going to happen to iron ore. So therefore, I can't give some indication. I look at the market at the moment, and I look at, Brisbane's been, blimey, it's been the bridesmaid for the last two cycles to Sydney and Melbourne, right? And whatever happened in Melbourne during COVID, we haven't had that growth here. Sydney's taken off again. Brisbane's gone gangbusters. Adelaide's incredible. Hobart came up as and grabbed the bouquet from the wedding, in the last couple of years. And, no one saw that coming. And I think back to some data I had Peter Kalizis do, he did in a book that he wrote 8 years ago. And I had him, show some of my students his spreadsheets. And you look over the long term and you're like, oh, look, Darwin outperformed all of Australia for a number of years in the last 20 years. It's like, oh, wait a second, we forget about Darwin. And there is these cycles. And, when we're in the super focus of where we are right now, and we have that cognitive bias that says, I want to buy in Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, whatever, Perth, you're reading the articles that validate that. And I think listening to people like yourself and listening to a multiple of people that have different opinions, and they're saying, but what about this data? Have and I think you said something earlier when you were talking about, there's two types of people. Is that too much information looking at the sun, and there's not enough information, and some ignorance that's like naivety or just don't know. You have to be able to take that self-responsibility and step up and say, it's information. I'm going to put it in my toolbox. I'm going to, as much as the ability that I have, I'm going to navigate through it. And if I don't have that ability, I'm going to seek out someone who can assist me, but not necessarily take the responsibility of my investments off me. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so well said. I think um I was probably guilty of it, and I think a lot of people who follow me, I should be saying this, they're probably guilty of it. You find someone that you like their content, and you just go down a sort of deep, dark rabbit hole, and then you start drinking the Kool-Aid. But like you said, I think you need to consume content from a variety of operators. And I always say, just skim out all their opinions. That's my opinion. Skim out all their opinions and just go to what is the actual insight or data that they've shared, because you listen to 10 podcasts and there's maybe 5 sentences of data that's actually shared. So go to the actual data, and then it's actually not hard. You don't need to be super intelligent. It's just a little bit of uncommon sense, common sense, which is uncommon. Just, okay, well, I heard this data point from Jane. I heard this data point or this trend from this other person, this aspect, create a multi-dimensional data picture or story in your mind, and then at least you won't be fooled. Okay, that in of itself may not be enough to get an amazing result, but at least you won't make mistakes then. All right, at least you won't be on the sideline just when COVID started. At least you won't think that when interest rates rise, that all housing markets drop 20%. At least these basic errors won't be made. And Jane, when I do some analysis, I find that over 30 years, the standard deviation, or how much capital growth differs suburb to suburb across the 16,000 suburbs in Australia, over 30 years, it's not so much. All right. So it doesn't take much to avoid huge mistakes and still make money in property. But of course, there's different personality types. Some people don't want to leave any money on the table, and they want to hit the jackpot, and they want to hit the bullseye. And, then you just go deeper into the data. And for some people, it's like, fine, I know Jane and PK are saying don't buy in my backyard, but to hell with you guys. I want to buy in my backyard anyway, but I'm going to buy the best property I can.
I mean, I did a interview on my Exit the Matrix podcast of a guy that buys like in golf resorts, you know, in the Gold Coast. I'm like, we were always told not to do that. How did you make millions doing that? And what I love about that is that you know, there is so much information out there, and it can feel like, you know, it is too much. But the reality is, there is, as you say, there's those beautiful nuances where you're saying to us and sharing, you know, your insights on using a property manager to potentially assist you in buying, or some of the kind of random things that I think back of is, you know, looking at how many cranes are above the cities. You know, Sydney and Melbourne are outperforming Brisbane. Like, that means built. So, you know, there's a crane count. There's this random type of information. And I used to go, when I used to go to towns or areas to learn about the population, I'd go into the newsagent and look at the magazines to see what the interest was there. So you kind of get a feel for the demographic. So there's all of these kind of intangibles around property investing that should give, you know, you guys who are listening to this permission to go, I don't actually have to follow a certain person's way. There are so much information, and you know, you gain it yourself, and you know, you put your own intelligence and skill set of it. And when I started as an explosives engineer using risk assessment, I used in the explosives industry to risk assess the likelihood of something going wrong and the consequence and what I was going to do about it for every property I bought. So, you know, having that trust in your own skill set, I think, is important as well, which is fantastic.
Very true. Be a contrarian, I think. That it's the funnest thing. Yeah, it's maybe you don't make so many friends, but be a contrarian and you often make the most money.
And you know what? The thing about the Australian property market, it's not an excuse, but time does heal all wounds. I guess one of the biggest issues that people have, interest rates. We've had people, you know, banks saying that they were going to go up, maybe go down at the end of the year. We've now got some numbers that people are going, oh, it could be next year. Have you got any thoughts or final considerations with that?
Yeah, I think like in the context of where we are in the interest rate cycle, it's not so consequential whether they go up again once or twice. It's not so consequential whether they drop once or twice or remain flatline. It's consequential if they rise again by 100 basis points. It's consequential if they drop by 100 basis points. But I don't think any of those things are likely to happen in the 18 months from now. So it's like interest rates are a bit of a moot topic when it comes to decision making of whether to invest or not.
And you know, I think in my early days of investing, there was an ignorance because I was just like, when I can afford it, I'm going to buy the best property I can. And it worked, right? In the best
Yeah.
area I can buy it.
Mm.
Just a little anecdote. I was having a chat with my husband and I were having a chat over dinner with our 16-year-old son the other day. And we're talking about this property that, you know, oh, should we sell it? These tenants are really upsetting me. The Victorian tenancy laws are changing. They can paint the place and do everything, and I got no control. And we're having like a little tiz, and you know, a moment of a tiz. And he said, "Oh, you know, how much did it cost you? How much did you have when you bought that first property?" And I said, "Oh, you know, I bought the $425,000 property with $25,000." And I said, "That's all I had." And he's like, "How old were you?" I was like, "Oh, like, you know, 30." He's like, "You only had $25,000 at 30?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Mum, I've got like half of that now." And he's flipping shoes. He's 16, and he and his mates are flipping Nike shoes, buying them new on big drops and selling to someone who can't get to the store or whatever. Supply and
Oh,
demand, supply and demand,
didn't know
coins
that
and
was a
things.
thing. That's awesome.
And it's extraordinary. And he's like, "Mum, at 16, I've got like half of the deposit. Where can I buy a house?" He said, "But $25,000 at a deposit, I couldn't do that these days." And I'm like, there's going to be a webinar. I'm talking to someone who talks about buying properties for $425,000. That's you, PK. So he got in trouble the other day for not taking out the bins. And I said, "You get to choose your punishment." He said, "Listening to you." So I
Oh
made
my
him listen
God.
to a webinar. So
Please
I'm going
don't
to make
force
him
anyone to
listen to
listen to
this.
me, not least your son.
My son's punishment is listening to this. But no, I think it's, you know, the fact that there are properties available that are cash flow, people who are hitting that ceiling of serviceability and thinking, well, that's it, I'm out of the game. There could be opportunities, you know, as we said, love up your mortgage broker and your property manager, but there could be opportunities for you still. And, you know, you've just, you know, named 4 or 5 areas that have population growth, good cash flow, and people are buying under $500,000. So I guess the big message here, and what I really appreciate you sharing, is don't give up hope. Just because the prices in where you live might look too big and everyone says you have to conform to a particular way of buying, there is another way. And PK, I really appreciate you sharing that with us today.
I'm very, very happy to have made a small difference or a piece of inspiration or piece of knowledge that hopefully allows people to take the next step.